Mick Turner's pulse raced as he dropped to the ground behind a cargo crate. He had seconds to act. Through the dimly lit corridors of the alien ship, he could hear the heavy footsteps of the HFY soldiers approaching. The children were still trapped on the other side of the hull, and time was running out. "I'm coming for you, kids," he muttered, voice low and grim. But as the air grew thick with the hum of alien machinery, one voice, alien and unnervingly calm, crackled over his comms. "Did you capture human children as prisoners? You are insane!" The voice belonged to Zorith, and Mick knew this wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was a war for humanity's very soul. Mick Turner crouched in the dimly lit operations room of Earth Command, his eyes scanning the flickering holoscreen in front of him. His pulse raced with a familiar cold, the kind of rush that came with the realization that something was about to go very wrong. The mission brief was short, blunt. Too blunt. HFY warship Kragath has entered Earth's orbit. Unknown hostile intentions. We believe they've targeted human civilians. The screen flashed, and the image of the alien vessel took up the entire screen, a monstrous thing, sleek and dark, hovering like a predator circling its prey. But it was the next part that set his blood on fire. Human children taken as prisoners. The words echoed in his head as he leaned closer, scanning the footage that followed. A group of children, their faces filled with fear, shoved into cages like animals. Some of them were no older than 6 or 7. One in particular caught his attention, a girl with wild brown hair and an oversized yellow sweater clutching her stuffed bear. Emma. He had known her, had seen her at the base just a few months ago. "Sir?" A voice broke through his thoughts. Colonel Harris, the operations leader, stood at the far side of the room, watching him with a tense expression. "We're putting together a strike team. You're on the list." Mick didn't hesitate. "When do we leave?" "Immediately," Harris replied. "Your mission is clear: infiltrate the Kragath, extract the hostages, and get them back to Earth. But the HFY are no joke. Their tech is light years ahead of ours." "I know," Mick muttered, his jaw tightening. The HFY weren't just technologically advanced, they were ruthless. Entire planets had fallen to their military might, civilizations left in ruins, their populations enslaved or wiped out. But Mick wasn't afraid of their weapons. He was afraid of what they might do to those children. "Don't worry," Harris added, his voice low. "We've got your back." Mick didn't respond. He grabbed his gear bag, checked his rifle's pulse load, and walked toward the shuttle bay. His mind was already on the mission. He couldn't afford to waste time thinking about the risks. Lives were on the line, and the children had no time to spare. Hours later, the team was aboard the shuttle, rocketing toward the Kragath. Mick sat in silence, staring out the small view window. The vastness of space stretched before him, an endless sea of darkness. His fingers tapped nervously against his seat, though he didn't show it. His thoughts returned to Emma and the others. They were out there somewhere. Captive. Trapped. Approaching the ship. The pilot's voice crackled through their comms, breaking the tension. Mick stood and checked his gear again. His team was ready. Sergeant Daniels, a sharpshooter with a no-nonsense attitude. Corporal Williams, the tech expert, who could hack into anything with a keyboard and a few lines of code. And Lieutenant Alvarez, the tactical planner, who could turn any situation into an advantage. They were a well-oiled machine, but Mick knew the HFY weren't just any enemy. "We're boarding in 10. Williams muttered as he worked on the shuttle's systems, bypassing security protocols. Mick nodded, his expression grim. "Stay focused. We get in, we find the kids, and we get out. No heroics. No mistakes." The ship shuddered as it docked with the Kragath. The airlock opened with a hiss, and Mick led the team inside, guns at the ready. The interior of the HFY ship was a stark contrast to their human shuttle. The walls were smooth, metallic, and lit with a strange blue hue that made the space feel more like a cold, alien tomb than a functioning vessel. "Stay close," Alvarez whispered, keeping his voice low. "We're in enemy territory now." They moved down narrow hallways, footsteps muffled by the soft hum of the ship's systems. Every door they passed seemed to watch them, its alien technology scanning for intruders. Williams was ahead, fingers flying over his portable device, bypassing locks and security grids. Almost there, Williams muttered, his voice tight with concentration. Mick glanced over at him, his mind racing. The mission was simple: get to the prison block, free the children, and get them back to Earth. But something about the ship felt wrong. The silence was unnerving. In the distance, he thought he heard something, scraping, like a distant, dragging sound. But when he paused to listen, it was gone. His gut churned. He hated this feeling. "Here we go," Williams finally said, breaking the silence. The doors to the prison block slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a cold, sterile room lined with holding cells. The children were there, huddled together in the far corner of the room, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. Emma was at the front, clutching her stuffed bear as if it were a lifeline. Mick's breath caught in his throat. "We're here to take you home," he said, his voice as steady as he could make it. He gestured for his team to spread out and secure the area. But just as he stepped forward, a voice boomed over the comms, so clear it could have been right next to him. "Did you capture human children as prisoners? You are insane," the voice growled. Mick froze, every hair on his neck standing on end. The voice was calm, but laced with venom. He knew that voice. "Zorith. Don't move," Mick ordered his team. "We've got company." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship, and the sound of pounding footsteps echoed down the hallway. It wasn't just the children at risk now. The entire mission was compromised. "Time's up," Mick muttered, reaching for his rifle. "Get the kids out. We're on a clock." As they started to move, the hum of the ship shifted, almost imperceptibly, but unmistakable. The trap was closing in. The Ethiri knew they were here. And Mick knew this was only the beginning. The adrenaline hit as Mick pushed the children toward the exit, praying they would make it. The ship was no longer just a prison for the kids, it was a hunting ground, and Mick and his team were the prey. "We've got to move faster," Alvarez urged, her voice sharp. But Mick wasn't listening anymore. The Ethiri were coming. And he wasn't leaving without those kids. The air in the Kragath was thick, unnatural, as if the ship itself was watching, waiting. Mick could feel it, a growing pressure, an invisible weight pressing down on his chest. The mission had gone from a straightforward rescue to something much darker, and with every passing second, the danger escalated. He didn't need to hear the alarms blaring throughout the ship to know they were being hunted. The cold sweat on his brow was enough. "Move out!" Mick barked, his voice cutting through the tension. He motioned for the children to stay close as they moved down another sterile, eerily silent corridor. He glanced at Alvarez, who had her hand on the trigger of her rifle, eyes scanning every corner for movement. "We've got 20 minutes tops, before they know exactly where we are," Alvarez muttered under her breath, her tone grim. "We need to find an exit," Mick said, his eyes flicking from the children to the dimly lit hallways. "Williams, what's the status on the escape route?" Williams, hunched over his portable device, cursed under his breath. "I'm working on it, but this ship is a fortress. The Ethiria's security is tight, and every door I crack open feels like a gamble. We've been detected for sure." Mick's mind raced. He wasn't used to being outgunned, but the Ethiri had a way of making even the most confident man feel like prey. His focus snapped back to the children, who were all huddled together, clutching their few remaining belongings as if the ship's strange lights and alien metal would swallow them whole. The youngest one, a boy no older than 4, clung to Emma, his little hand trembling. "Keep moving," Mick ordered, trying to steady his own nerves. The sound of distant footsteps echoed again. It wasn't just the guards now, it was something else. Something worse. He could feel it, the shift in the atmosphere as the ship's systems seemed to react to their every move. "We can't keep dodging them forever," Sergeant Daniels said, his voice low and rough, eyes scanning the corridor ahead. "We need a plan B." Mick didn't answer right away. His thoughts were elsewhere. Zoratha's voice, calm, calculated, with that chilling sense of superiority, kept echoing in his head. Did you capture human children as prisoners? You are insane! The HFY commander's words stung, but Mick had no time for sentiment. Zorath had underestimated humanity before, and Mick intended to make sure he paid for it. The group continued through the narrow halls, the walls now shifting slightly as if the ship itself was alive. It was an unsettling feeling, a creeping dread that gnawed at Mick's nerves. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched from every angle, though he couldn't pinpoint how or why. We're close, Williams said suddenly, looking up from his device. There's a maintenance access hatch 2 corridors over. If I can get it open, we'll be able to slip into the lower levels of the ship and avoid most of their patrols. Mick nodded. Lead the way. The hallway stretched ahead, quiet save for their hurried footsteps. Each turn felt like it brought them deeper into the bowels of the Craggoth, the air growing colder, more oppressive. The tension between the team was palpable now, their nerves fraying as the minutes ticked by. The children had grown quieter too, their fear settling into a kind of paralyzed stillness. As they approached the hatch, the sound of alien footsteps grew louder. Mick motioned for everyone to halt and pressed himself against the wall, scanning the corners with a practiced eye. He could hear the low growl of HFY voices in the distance, a language that sent a chill down his spine every time he heard it. The HFY were close, and they weren't going to stop until they had them. Now or never, Williams, Mick whispered urgently. Williams was already working on the hatch, his fingers moving with precision. Just a few more seconds, got it? The hatch slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a narrow, darkened maintenance tunnel. Everyone inside, now! Mick commanded. They slipped into the tunnel one by one, the door sliding shut just as a HFY patrol rounded the corner. The sound of their boots echoed for a moment longer, then faded into the distance. Mick let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Too close, Daniels muttered. Williams turned to Mick, his face grim. We need to move fast. We're in their guts now. There's no way to know how long we've got before they launch a full sweep of the ship. Then we don't waste time, Mick replied, his voice hard with determination. We find the kids, get them to safety, and then we make our exit. They pressed on through the cramped tunnel, moving as quickly as possible without making a sound. The darkness swallowed them whole, and the further they went, the more alien the ship felt. Mick kept his focus forward, the sound of his breath the only thing that kept him grounded. Up ahead, Williams said, his voice sharp with urgency. He pointed to a faint glow at the end of the tunnel. That's the core of their main control room. If we can get in there, I can disable their internal systems. It'll slow them down enough for us to escape. Can you do it without triggering a full security lockdown? Mick asked. Williams looked at him, a hint of frustration in his eyes. I'll do my best, but this place is a fortress. You're asking for a miracle. Mick didn't hesitate. Then we make our own miracle. They reached the control room entrance, and Williams immediately went to work, his fingers flying over the panel. The rest of the team formed a perimeter, weapons at the ready, eyes flicking back and forth as the tension in the air grew unbearable. Almost there, Williams muttered. His brow was slick with sweat, his eyes darting between the screen and the door, trying to anticipate any surprises. Just as the panel clicked open, an explosion of sound erupted from the hallway behind them, a screeching alarm and the sharp, guttural commands of HFY soldiers. Too late! Williams cursed, slamming the panel shut. They're coming! Get to the hatch, now! Mick ordered. They turned, weapons raised, but it was already too late. The hallway outside was swarming with HFY soldiers, their eyes glowing bright in the dark. The fight for survival had just begun. Stay together! Mick shouted, pushing the children toward the farthest corner of the room. Alvarez, cover the rear! Daniels, Williams, with me! The team opened fire, their weapons lighting up the darkened hall in a burst of light. The HFY were relentless, charging forward with the speed and strength of predators, but Mick was unyielding. The battle for these children was far from over, and Mick Turner would see it through, no matter the cost. But the fight was only getting started. The hallway erupted into chaos. HFY soldiers flooded the passage, their long, predatory bodies moving with unnatural speed. The hum of their energy shields and the hiss of their plasma weapons filled the air, crackling like thunder before a storm. Mick's heart hammered in his chest, but his focus was razor-sharp. The children, Emma, the others, were in danger. They couldn't stay here much longer. "Alvarez, cover the right!" Mick shouted, ducking behind a bulkhead as blaster fire sizzled past him. "Daniels, Williams, get the kids to the secondary tunnel. Move now!" Alvarez didn't hesitate. Her rifle spoke in short, controlled bursts, sending the first few HFY soldiers stumbling backward. But the enemy was relentless, pushing forward with wave after wave, their eyes glowing bright with hunger. Their alien shrieks echoed through the ship, a sound that made Mick's skin crawl. "Keep them back!" he yelled, turning to Daniels and Williams, who were already moving toward the children. "On it!" Daniels barked, covering the retreat with a flurry of gunfire. He moved like a machine, his aim deadly and precise, but Mick could see the strain in his eyes. The HFY weren't just soldiers, they were hunters, programmed to take down anything that stood in their way. Mick gripped his rifle tighter and stepped into the line of fire. His team was already outnumbered, but he wasn't about to let them fall. The HFY weren't going to get these kids. Not today. The plasma bolts sizzled around him, heating the air, but Mick kept moving. He fired in short bursts, picking off one soldier after another. Each HFY that fell only seemed to make the others more furious. Their bodies twitched and contorted unnaturally as they charged forward with renewed determination. "Where's the exit?" Mick shouted over the comms to Williams. "I've got a location, but the door's locked. It's rigged with the HFY security protocols. I need 30 seconds. Williams answered, his voice strained. 30 seconds? We don't have 30 seconds, Mick growled. He darted forward, his boots pounding against the metallic floor. A sharp, alien shriek cut through the noise of the battle. One of the HFY soldiers lunged at him, its razor-sharp claws flashing in the dim light. Mick barely had time to raise his weapon. The creature crashed into him, sending him sprawling to the ground. The weight of it crushed him, the stench of alien bile making his throat tighten. But Mick wasn't about to let that be the end. He jammed his rifle into the creature's chest and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, and the HFY soldier convulsed, releasing its hold on Mick. With a grunt, Mick shoved the body off of him and scrambled to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest. He didn't have time to waste. 10 seconds! Williams shouted. Get to the hatch! Mick yelled to his team. The children were huddled behind cover, eyes wide with fear. Emma's face was pale, her stuffed bear clutched tightly in her arms. She was trying to be brave, but the terror in her eyes was undeniable. Don't worry, Emma. We're getting you out of here, Mick said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. He met Williams' gaze, the tech expert's fingers flying across his device, his brow furrowed in concentration. I'm almost in, Williams said. Sweat was dripping from his forehead, his hands shaking with the effort. Mick's eyes darted toward the oncoming HFY, who were closing the gap with terrifying speed. He fired a quick burst of rounds, knocking a few of them back, but it wasn't enough. The HFY were relentless, and they were starting to regroup, forming a new line of assault. Now! Williams shouted, just as the door in front of them flickered to life. The hatch slid open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit corridor beyond. Move, move, move! Mick yelled, pushing the kids forward. They ran. The HFY soldiers were too close now, and Mick could feel the heat of their weapons on his back. They weren't far from the tunnel that led to the outer airlock, but the HFY were closing in fast. Mick glanced back to make sure his team was keeping up. Keep going! Daniels shouted, his voice tight with urgency. Mick grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her forward, ignoring the sting in his legs and the burn in his chest. He could hear the others behind him, but the sound of pounding feet and the occasional shot ringing out told him they were being pursued. The pressure was building in his skull, the weight of their situation becoming unbearable. Every corner, every door, every turn could be their last. Almost there! Williams called from the front. We're one corridor away from the airlock. But as they rounded the next corner, the harsh sound of a HFY screeching cut through the air. Mick's pulse spiked. They had been outflanked. Another squad of HFY had arrived, blocking their path forward. Shit! Alvarez muttered, her rifle trained on the new group of enemies. We need to fight our way through, Mick said, his voice cold with resolve. He turned to Daniels. Cover me. I'll draw their fire. What? Daniels snapped. You're insane, Mick! Mick didn't have time for arguments. Do it! Now! He didn't wait for a response. With a deep breath, he charged forward, taking the fight to the HFY. The corridor was narrow, but the HFY were relentless, charging forward with savage precision. Mick fired as he ran, every shot aimed to kill. His rifle kicked back in his hands with each burst, but he kept going. Cover him! Alvarez shouted, firing a rapid barrage of shots to keep the HFY distracted. Come on, Mick! Move! The door to the airlock was in sight, but it felt like it was miles away. The HFY were getting closer, their snarls growing louder. Mick could feel the cold sweat pouring down his back, the weight of the mission pressing on him. But he didn't stop. Not now. Not ever. With one last burst of energy, he dove for the airlock door, slamming into it just as the HFY reached him. The hatch closed with a hiss, and the battle outside fell silent. For a brief moment, Mick felt the weight of the universe lift off his shoulders. Status? Mick rasped, his breath ragged. We're clear, Williams confirmed. We made it. Mick looked at the kids, Emma, still holding her stuffed bear, her eyes wide with disbelief. They were safe. But Mick knew the war was far from over. The HFY had learned humanity wasn't to be underestimated. But humanity was more than capable of fighting back. They were alive. And that, for now, was enough. Let's get home, Mick muttered, as the shuttle doors sealed shut behind them.